and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at two very important stories. The first is with reference to Pakistan and the economic challenges that confront the nation and the new government as well. There have been a number of things that we've discussed on the economic front that is, of course, of high value for the government and for the people as well. We understand that the IMF, as the IMF's program is also a very large priority for the government, something that has been spoken about in press conference by Mifta Ismail as well. This is something that is needed for the economy. However, it comes with conditions that the IMF has put forward, which is going to mean more difficult times perhaps in the short term for the economy as well. Whether or not the new government is going to be willing to take such actions is something that we'll explore in the show today. We'll also take a look at the kind of numbers that we are seeing coming in from the PMLN side and the PTI as well, because there seems to be quite a difference in the numbers that have been quoted. What has happened in the previous government, how many loans were taken, and what are the measures that are going to be taken by the new government to be able to change those numbers so that we can see a better economy, or perhaps a better direction in which the economy can move in. We also understand that the growth is projected by the IMF to grow by 4% this fiscal year through June, and perhaps slightly higher next year. Whether or not the current numbers actually support this growth, and if they are dependent on certain actions taken by the government, and if the government is going to be willing to take those, we'll try and see in our first segment today. In our second segment, we'll be taking a look at the situation with regards to the Ukrainian crisis. We have seen that in the past there was a lot of talk about how this has been a personal agenda of Vladimir Putin, and we've seen now that Joe Biden has also talked about how Putin has not been successful in gaining any ground or seeking his objective in Ukraine, and that the Ukrainian forces plus the civilians have responded well. But we're going to see whether or not there's going to be enough for the Russian forces to back away from what they're confronting at the moment. We've seen an increase in sanctions on Russia in the past. We've seen a lot of support and help for the Ukrainian forces and the people from both the US and Canada and elsewhere as well. But moving forward, what is going to be the resolution of this crisis, and how are we going to see it evolve, and whether or not Russia is actually going to step away from its measures. This is something we'll explore in the second segment of our show today. We've been joined in the studios, as always, by Farrukh Pitafi and not Raja Faisal. He's not with us today. He has been blessed with a baby daughter, so we're very happy for him, and of course his wife, and we hope that she has a wonderful and healthy life. We're also going to be joined online by two guests who are going to be taking a look at our first segment. We've been joined by Dr. Farrukh Salim, who's a columnist, and we've also been joined by Rana Ihsan Afzal Khan, who's a political leader of the PMLN. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us today. I'll start with you, Azaza. When we look at what has been going on in the country with regards to the economic challenges that confront the nation, and the kind of issues that have been highlighted both by the PMLN and by the PTI as well, we've seen that there is a lot of distinction in what is being quoted. And we want to be really clear as to where does the economy currently stand, where do the reserves stand. A lot of the numbers that we've been putting out from both the sides we're hearing are not exactly the same. Can you also help us understand where the situation actually currently stands?
Thank you so much. So I think we should start with the foreign reserves. That is, a major concern currently in your macroeconomic stability, your debt repayments. So that is all concerned with your foreign reserves. So in August 2021, your reserves, the state bank reserves, were standing at almost 20 billion US dollars. And in the few months that have passed, the reserves have almost, gone down below 10 billion US dollars. So that means that 10 billion US dollars have been, wiped out of your foreign reserves. And that is one of the reasons why the strength of the rupee is falling or trailing away. And another reason for that is that your current account deficit, there is a lot of pressure on that side. Your trade deficit is going to be the highest ever in the country's history. It will almost reach to 45 billion US dollars, and your current account deficit might actually, cross 20 billion US dollars. So that is the scenario on your external side. That is why we are going to IMF, because we need dollars. We need to go to, we need IMF's certification to raise money from international markets. And we feel that Mifta Saab's success is very important on that side. So on the fiscal side, you see that they had budgeted a 4 trillion rupee deficit, but what has revealed now is that the fiscal deficit is actually going to be 5.6 trillion. So that is a 1.6 trillion jump, and that is extraordinary. And on top of that, we are giving a subsidy on petrol, which is amounting to almost 65 billion in April. But apart from
Right,
that, we had
right.
to collect taxes from the petroleum levy and sale tax, which were not right now. So the losses on petrol alone are crossing over 100 billion rupees per month. And if you multiply that with 12, that amounts to 1,200 billion rupees, which is bigger than the PSDP development budget of
All
Pakistan.
right, Rana
So
Sahab,
you
we'll continue the discussion. We'll just go to a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the debate. We're talking about the economic challenges that the new government in Pakistan faces and what's going to be done about it. Dr. Farrukh Salim, when we look at what has been going on in the country and the kind of challenges that we've seen, of course, this is a huge task for the new government to take it forward as well. We've seen that there is a projected growth of 4% by the IMF, but however, we see that perhaps the numbers that we see right now are not really supporting that. Do you think that this is something that we'll be able to see in the near future?
I really couldn't really understand your. I think the voice is not very clear, but I'll make a guess. I'll try to answer. I heard. See, the biggest faced by the in Pakistan is the rate of inflation, and for the government itself, earlier.
All right, Dr. Farrukh, there seems to be a problem with your audio. We'll come back to you. Yes, Farrukh.
Right. You're asking me now?
Yeah, we can go to Rana Sahab.
Yeah,
no, I thought you had a question for that.
No, I had a question for both of them, but Rana Sahab, let me ask you about your government. You were also present, I noticed, during the first meeting of the Prime Minister with business leaders. Do tell us, how do you actually plan to take care of all these problems that you have highlighted?
Well, I think the external stability is of utmost importance. We need to have an import cover of at least a quarter. And for that, we need to be with the IMF program. And I think that is one solution going ahead with it. And it will
Yeah,
be a
IMF
difficult
program
task.
is important, sir, but IMF actually asks you to do away with subsidies in various sectors, particularly petroleum products, energy, and so on. So how do you plan to do it? Because you have already announced that you are not going to do away with the petroleum subsidy.
Well, the petroleum subsidy is going to stay for the month of April, but as of now, I don't know if a decision has been taken for the month of May. So, that could change in May. And obviously, it is dependent on how the IMF negotiation goes. So, our effort will be to convince IMF that in the current scenario where inflation levels are really high, it will not be feasible to pass on this price hike to the common man, and that is where our negotiations will be be focused on. So let's hope that in a day or two a good news comes from the trip of Mifta Saab. That is one side. The other side, the fiscal side, obviously we're going to try and control the current expenditures to whatever extent we can, and on the other side try to control the fiscal deficit or raise revenues. So obviously, policy making on both sides will take place. Apart from
Right.
that, this is a government which is for a very short mandate. We will be focused on, trying to make sure that inflation is under check, and that can happen by three ways. Number one, your currency exchange. If we stabilize it, that is, as I've already said, our priority, and we're working on it. Number two, it is related to the international market. So that part we don't have much control, and the
Right.
outlook for the
Currency
next 2 quarters.
stabilization, currency stability is linked also to current account situation. How do you plan to actually improve that?
Well, we are looking over, whatever is being imported in the country, and we feel that it is high time that we go away with any luxury items, or try to discourage unnecessary import. So there's a process, there's a
But
which
is
is
it
happening right
exactly
now.
not what we have been hearing from your previous government, then the previous government, and now you? These are the basic same measures. We keep on actually focusing on SROs, how to do away with the SROs, rationalize this tariff, stop that product from coming to the country, but it hardly fixes the things.
Yes, right now, the thing is, Farooq Saab, that the mandate of this government is only 15 months. And, it's not for certain whether it's going to complete its tenure. So our priority is stabilization. And whatever short-term measures we can take to stabilize the external side, the internal side, which is the fiscal deficit, or be it your public sector enterprises. So whatever short-term measures we can take to bring stability to the country, we're going to do that, and that is going to be the top priority of the country.
All right, all
And
right.
in
Rana
a way,
Sahab, we've also seen that Mifta Sahab has spoken about PTI's freezing of energy prices, something that was illogical and ill-advised. Will we be seeing a rollback of that?
well, as I've said earlier, that it is dependent on how the negotiations with the IMF go, and our stance is going to be that we should not remove them 100%, but we can do that in phases. But it is obvious, and we need to understand that the scale of subsidy being given on the petroleum products is impossible. No one can sustain it. No one,
Right.
any government, even bring it. So that has to be rethought over. And one point of view on that is that a factory may be consuming 100,000 liters per month of
Right.
diesel or petrol in their generators or in their tractors, and a
No, that is
common
true.
man might be.
Rana Sahab, allow me to actually frame your dilemma. You just pointed out that you have very limited mandate, worth only 15 months. I totally get it. But on the other side, there are two things. One, you have displaced a political party which was in power and which is on the roads at this moment agitating against you and demanding early elections. Secondly, thirdly, you have also talked about stabilizing the economy. The Prime Minister has. Now, the third thing actually needs a lot of tough decisions. As you pointed out, the price hike in the petroleum products up to the level of 80 rupees at this moment, and then of course electricity products as well, that will be humongous jump. So how do you reconcile the three things, or you risk becoming locked out of the economy, a sinking economy, or then losing the next elections?
Well, the only reason, Patafi Saab, that we intervened in such difficult times is that if the previous government would have been allowed to continue, things would have maybe gotten to a point of no return. And the decisions we're going to take are going to be, for the sake of saving Pakistan, which have to be taken, which is, better managing the economy. And I'm not saying that the previous government was, on purpose sinking it, but
Yeah.
they did not have a
So
plan or
the
a
so the
proper.
plan is save Pakistan, lose the election.
No, I think the people of Pakistan will be informed about each and every decision, and we feel, after a few months, things will start reversing. We will see improvement.
Right.
Hopefully, inshallah,
Rana Sahab,
when
I
we
want to understand when you speak about how if the previous government if it was able to complete its term, then the economy would have been at a point of no return. Of course, that means that a lot of the measures taken by the PTI were leading us to a path where the economy was going to get destroyed even further. Can you help me understand what those measures exactly are that you want to be able to reverse, and you have immediate plans to be able to do otherwise, and we'll see a change in the direction the economy is going?
Okay, for example, the PTI government was going with the IMF plan, and all of a sudden they took a U-turn on all the commitments they made. So those commitments have to be taken care of and implemented. We will be going through. We plan to do that so that our external side is going to be secured. On the local side, the tax to GDP ratio dropped from 11.1% in 2018 to 9% today. So obviously, that was not a place where they performed really well. Tax collection is going to be an area of focus, and we plan to improve things on that side as well, as I've said earlier as well. So these are, then
All
inflation,
right.
as I was
All right.
saying.
Thank you very much,
I
Rana Sam. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much for joining us and being a part of the debate. We'll continue our discussion with our next segment after the short break. Welcome back to the debate. We'll now be talking about our second segment, which is going to focus on the Ukrainian crisis and what has been going on there for a while now. We understand that there have been statements from the US pointing out the fact that Vladimir Putin has been unsuccessful. He has failed in his objectives in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian forces and its people have responded effectively to the agenda of the Russian forces. We'll also be taking a look at where this crisis is heading, what is going to be the evolving situation, whether or not there is a chance for a peaceful dialogue, and what are we going to see in the coming days and weeks. For this, we've been joined online by Mr. Johar Salim, who's Pakistan's ambassador to Italy. We've been also joined by Umar Karim, who's a research fellow at RUSI. Thank you very much all for joining us. Farrukh, when we look at what has been going on in Ukraine, we understand that we have spoken about the fact that perhaps Vladimir Putin is on his own personal agenda and he has his own personal objectives to gain. The statement that have come from the US says that Putin has failed, but could it be possible that perhaps Vladimir Putin is on a completely different track, that we're not really sure of what exactly his motivation is and what he wants to achieve?
Yeah, when you asked what track he is on, I was thinking perhaps you're going to say that he's on a different plane of reality. Because at this moment, whatever propaganda is coming from the Russian television stations or their media, you keep on listening to that and you feel that Ukraine has been stabilized, it has been actually moderated, and everything is hunky-dory. But when you look at what has been going on in Mariupol and various other parts of Ukraine, and the kind of violence that we have seen perpetrated from this side, that actually astonishes you. I think yesterday there was also a meeting with Shoigu, the army chief, and actually the minister of defense of Russia, and Putin met him, and we saw that the whole idea of these long tables that he used to have are gone. Now there was a very shortish table, and the body language actually was such that there seemed to be assertion from the other side as well. I think at this moment things have reversed. Whatever actually he was trying to achieve, the first target was to take over Ukraine. That didn't happen. Then the second one was to maximize your benefits. That didn't happen. Now focus is on Donbass and trying to actually leave behind the rump of the country by taking over 3 sides of the country. So at this moment that is going on. We still have to wait and see what becomes of it, or whether it actually escalates further, as was said by Zelensky, but let's hope it doesn't.
All right. Mr. Salim, when we look at the evolving situation in Ukraine, there doesn't seem to be a chance of peaceful dialogue, or perhaps the peaceful dialogue actually resulting in something which is a tangible solution to what is going on. Do you think that perhaps this is something that can be seen as a possibility, as a way to diffuse what's going on at the moment?
Thank you. First of all, there was a dialogue which was going on.
Sure.
And there was hope that the level of the dialogue would be raised to the presidents, that is President Putin and President Zelensky. But instead, what we saw was that in recent days, what happened around Mariupol and in Mariupol, and some of the mass graves and evidence of atrocities that was discovered around Kiev itself, that vitiated the ambience to a degree that dialogue is not meaningful anymore. I think the military conflict has intensified in recent days. Russia, which seemed desperate for any military advances, any military successes, so to speak, is finally getting some in the south of Ukraine, in the city of Mariupol. and in the Donbas region. But in the rest of the country, it has been a stalemate. And Russia has suffered, as many analysts, some reverses, as military reverses as well. It has been now 2 months, as we all know, on 2 days from now, it will be 2 months that the current phase of the conflict commenced. And still, it's a stalemate. And what we see now is that the situation, as it intensifies, the world getting more and more worried. And here, sitting in Europe, we can really feel the pulse and the devastating effects that we find in terms of the economic impact of this crisis, in terms of the stability of Europe, and of course, the world in many ways, and in terms of the possibility of because this is presently it's in a way it's a turf war between two superpowers because the Americans are providing all those arms and weapons to Ukraine, as we know, and Russia has issued many statements suggesting that if it doesn't stop, then it can take further punitive measures, or that the scope of the war could be enhanced. So that danger is there of the conflict spreading. And whenever there's a nuclear power involved in a conflict, and in this conflict, in fact, there are more than 1 in 2,000 directly or indirectly. But there's always a risk, the slightest risk of any nuclear activity could be disastrous for the whole world. So in that way, I think it's very important that the endeavors in place by many countries to initiate or to sustain the dialogue that have been taking place.
And I understand that, Mr. Salim. Of course, this is something that is impacting the entire world and affecting, like you said, obviously in terms of it escalating, getting out of hand, and also in economic terms as well. And this is something that, of course, the whole world is currently facing as well, and specifically Russia as well. There has been an increase in sanctions at Russia. However, when we look at the Russian actions, it seems that perhaps the sanctions haven't really had the effect of deterring Russia or having an impact on the way that Russian actions have been taken. Mr. Umar, when we see Russian moves and the kind of economic situation that we have resulted in, we've seen that, of course, countries like Canada and the US have offered their support and aid to the Ukrainian forces and civilians. And we understand that there have been sanctions in order to make sure that perhaps this doesn't escalate. However, it seems that these measures are not really fulfilling their prime objective because Russia seems to be, or Putin seems to be willing to pay all sorts of costs. So does this mean that perhaps the escalation of this conflict is inevitable?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, it seems so. Today, the British Prime Minister said that the war in Ukraine could last well till the end of this year. So this gives us a picture of where things are heading. And the crucial point, as Ambassador Salim Sab said, Russia has not able to, and also Pitafi Sab said, Russia has not able to achieve any significant political or military objective till now. The only, you can say, military objective they have achieved till now is connecting Crimea through ground with Donbas and to the Russian mainland. But still, like the front lines are very fragile, and the recent comments from Russian military officials suggest that they want to take over all of Donbas. So, in order to strengthen this ground linkage between Crimea and Donbas, because now it's all open. Russia cannot itself choose the end of this war. The West is an active player. The Ukrainians' resistance is a very much prominent factor, and they will not stop at okay, Russia's out of their borders and maybe the status quo before this war can again restore. So I think there will be a new status quo, and both sides, the Ukrainians, the Russians, of course, the West, they will try to have a status quo, a geopolitical status quo that is more favorable to them.
Right. Speaking of status quo, let me go back to Ambassador Saab about economic status quo. At this moment, it seems that one of the facts of life is that a lot of grain was produced by these two countries, Russia and Ukraine. And it seems that at this moment, as we speak, the grain prices, the maize prices are going to go up, and they are going to actually create a lot of problem. Do you think that there is a possibility of weaponization of economy as the new tool in coming days, as the new status quo economically, sir?
Well, when there's a war, naturally, like the actors involved in a war would use whatever weapons they have at their command. But we have to, of course, keep in view here that already the world economy is suffering. We see in many parts of the world, even in Europe and America, inflation crossing limits that it hasn't in the last 40 years. In countries like Germany, France, the US, where people had gotten used to just 1% inflation or 0% inflation or deflation. There's now they're witnessing 9%, 10%. Some other countries, like in our part of the world, Pakistan, for instance, Sri Lanka, many other countries, they've had much higher inflation. And that is because of two reasons. First, it's not just, of course, 30% of the world's wheat, for instance, used to come from Russia and Ukraine. And because of that war, there has been a major dent in that supply. Then again, the other side is the energy markets, where the Russians, they produce about 14% of the world's oil output and an equal or more percentage of the world's gas. And we have seen what effect has it produced on the world's energy markets.
Right.
And the problem with the
what
markets
does it mean, Ambassador Saab, sorry to cut you, but what does it mean in terms of economics for an economy or a world which is just recovering from COVID, impact of COVID? Now it is coming out of that phase, and now we have this kind of situation. Does it mean that we are certainly moving towards economic recession globally, or some kind of economic disruption in coming days?
Definitely, it could lead to that, because you see what happens is when you have high inflation, what do? The simple fact is that you raise the interest rate because you want to contain demand. And once you raise the interest rates, what happens? Then you create a recessionary environment, because the cost of doing business, the cost of money itself increases. And in any case, the money is being mopped by the banks. So that is a distinct possibility at this point in time. But I think the worst possibility, in my view, is that many countries in the world, including Pakistan, by the way, and we've already seen it happening in some countries such as Sri Lanka, could actually face balance of payment crises. Because you see, for developing countries, the cost of energy now, which has doubled, in fact, or more than doubled in certain segments, it is unbearable. And a balance of payment crisis then can lead to a currency crisis, or it could lead to a recession or even a depression. So this is a very distinct possibility now for the Western world.
Sadly.
Okay, the possibility of a recession, but for
Right.
emerging economies, for
Right,
developing
absolutely.
countries.
Umar, when we look at the situation with regards to the evolving situation, earlier you spoke about how, of course, there are projections that this may continue well until the end of this year. But again, when we see any conflict actually reach its conclusion, it's either if it's escalated to a point where we see that the one side has to back away because of so many losses that have been incurred, or there is a dialogue at the table, and then of course we see a resolution of the issues. Neither seem to be an option at the moment. But when we look at perhaps the different ways that we can see this conflict end, what are going to be some of the areas or issues that perhaps are still that still have some margin of compromise, either from the Russian side or perhaps different forces around the world can have a talk about it? Or does this mean that we might be seeing a conflict which is something that perhaps the world cannot afford?
And while you are at it, kindly try to address the first part of the question as well. How do you see, what exactly do you see as the outcome? A stalemate, some kind of resolution, or one-sided victory?
I think we need to keep in mind the two Chechen wars here. What happened in the first Chechen war, and then what happened in the second Chechen war. I think the first 2 months of this conflict, they were a learning phase for the Russians, because the Russians had very different estimates of Ukrainian resistance, of civilian resistance, of urban warfare, etc. And I think there have been repercussions in terms of purges in the FSB in this regard. So now the Russians also know what are their strengths. Their strengths are mainly within ground artillery, rocket artillery, and we will see that being used more and more. And in terms of like mass genocide, war crimes, they have already done that, done their bit. So I don't think so that this rationale will push them back a little bit. So they will use all of their force, especially ground artillery, to go through areas one by one. And I think any sort of, you can say, a dialogue that has to happen while compromising Ukrainian sovereignty, as we know, because this is something that has now connected with Russian nationalism, with Putin's image as the ultimate Russian leader, or reincarnation of probably the Tsars.
Right.
Or Stalin, or
so, Mr. Omar, does this mean that whatever solution we're looking at will never have the possibility of things being as they were before the Russian invasion? That's not a possibility.
yeah, definitely, because Russia is also paying a price now for this in terms of economic sanctions. There are direct sanctions on people, including President Putin. So it has incurred significant costs within Russia. I think there are more than 20,000 casualties within the Russian armed forces. So imagine now the forces going to fight within Ukraine. It's not the same force morale, or the same force, you can say, posture that was before this war. Now there would be battle-hardened people who would be ready to do whatever is being asked from their high command. There will also be lessons
Right.
learned in terms of
All
military
right.
strategy.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Umar Kareem and Mr. Joris Salim, for joining us and being a part of the debate. Farrukh, before we conclude our show, there are so many conflicts that we've looked at, and perhaps conflicts have, and people have a way of getting used to conflicts around the world. And we've discussed how certain conflicts have taken priority or not, but at the end of the day, a lot of the human suffering always takes the back burner. And that's unfortunate. Would you think this crisis that currently is in Ukraine and the people that are suffering there is something that we'll get used to eventually?
I don't know, Sana. Honestly, at this moment, the kind of pain and suffering we have seen coming from Ukraine, particularly now Mariupol, and then the kind of impact it can have on economy all over the world, especially in Africa, especially in the Middle East, where grain imports actually primarily come from Ukraine or Russia. There it is going to have humongous impact. So what happens there? I don't think that we can just become desensitized and say that it's yet another conflict.
Right.
I think there will have to be some kind of resolution, and hopefully the aggressor will have to withdraw.
And hopefully it will be sooner rather than later. That's all we have from the debate right now, and we hope that when we continue our discussions on different topics, we'll have something more to talk about which actually helps people around the world, within Pakistan, as something positive to look forward to. Have a nice weekend, everyone, and we'll see you on Monday.